The joyful shrieks of children, a sound that usually filled Inspector Marcus Thorne's heart with a quiet, profound satisfaction, were abruptly, brutally choked off. They were replaced by a sickening symphony of terrified screams, the horrifying shriek of twisting metal, and the sharp, explosive crack of splintering composite plastic. Marcus, the federal director of the newly established Playground Safety and ADA Compliance Bureau (FGSB), was standing near the entrance of the innovative adaptive sensory garden at Harmony Park. He was conducting a final informal walkthrough with Sarah Chen, the park's dedicated manager, just hours before its official dedication ceremony. He'd been admiring the thoughtfully designed wind chimes, their gentle tones, a stark contrast to the latent tension Sarah had described emanating from the adjacent ultra-exclusive Oakhaven estates. Another anonymous complaint about noise pollution from our wind chimes. Marcus. Sarah had sighed just moments before shaking her head. Mrs. Albright is relentless. Then disaster erupted at the park's magnificent centerpiece, the Rainbow Ascent, a custom-built multi-level inclusive slide complex, a marvel of engineering designed to be accessible and thrilling for children of all abilities. One moment, a dozen children, some in lightweight, brightly colored wheelchairs, others using walkers, many simply reveling in the liberating joy of the wide, gently sloping ramps and slides, were dotted across the structure, their laughter echoing. The next, a critical support pillar at the base of the main spiral slide, painted a cheerful sky blue, seemed to detonate at its connection point. A sharp, unnatural crack boom ripped through the air, distinctly different from a mere structural failure. With a grotesque, sickening lurch, the entire upper section of the slide complex twisted, groaned like a dying beast, and then collapsed inwards and downwards, sending children fractured plastic and jagged metal tumbling in a horrifying cascade onto the impact-attenuating rubber surface below. Dust, the metallic tang of sheared steel, and a wave of high-pitched screams clawed at the air. Parents and caregivers, moments before chatting animatedly on nearby benches or watching with proud smiles, were now sprinting, stumbling towards the mangled wreckage, their faces contorted into masks of pure, unadulterated terror. Some Oakhaven residents visible over their manicured hedges merely paused in their gardening expressions, more annoyed than alarmed. Marcus Thorne was already moving his mind, a finely honed instrument trained to dissect structural failures and assess catastrophic hazards, instantly kicking into overdrive, even as his heart hammered against his ribs with a cold, sickening dread. This wasn't a simple equipment failure. The way that pillar had given way, the specific explosive nature of the break, the almost surgical precision of the collapse, it looked hideously deliberately wrong. He saw Sarah Chen, her face ashen already, at the edge of the collapsed structure, desperately trying to reach a small girl in a bright pink wheelchair. Lily. Marcus knew her, a spirited 6-year-old with spina bifida, who adored the Rainbow Ascent. Lily was trapped precariously amidst a tangle of debris, her small hand outstretched, crying piteously for her mother, who was clawing her way towards her. "Don't move her!" And Jill, Marcus yelled his voice, a whip crack of authority that cut through the initial wave of panicked shouts, making several well-meaning but potentially harmful rescuers freeze. "Wait for emergency services. We don't know the extent of her injuries or the stability of the remaining structure. Clear a path." He was already on his federal emergency radio barking coordinates and a concise, brutal assessment to the regional dispatch. "This is Director Thorne, FGSB. Code 3 mass casualty incident. Harmony Park, 1120 Willow Creek Drive. Major structural collapse of adaptive playground equipment possible, explosive detonation at support column. Multiple pediatric injuries, some critical potential entrapments. Requesting immediate full emergency response fire, EMS, heavy rescue bomb squad for secondary device sweep. And notify local PD and the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. This scene needs to be preserved. I know this was deliberate sabotage. Deliberate sabotage. The words once uttered hung heavy and poisonous in the dust-choked air. As he moved closer to the wreckage, carefully avoiding disturbing potential evidence, his engineer's eyes sharpened by years of investigating accidents and designing for safety, was already spotting unnatural stress fractures, suspiciously clean breaks in support struts that should have bent or warped, but not snapped with such brittle finality. And near the base of the obliterated pillar, a glint of something incongruous, a small, scorched metallic fragment, unlike any component of the playground itself. A horrifying, unthinkable theory began to solidify. Someone had rigged this slide to collapse. Someone had intentionally, methodically, tried to harm, to murder these children. And then he saw her. Standing on the periphery of the chaos near the meticulously landscaped, almost fortified border of the adjacent Oakhaven estates was Karen Albright, president of the Oakhaven HOA, notorious local NIMBY, and the most vocal, vitriolic, and relentless opponent of Harmony Park's inclusive playground from its very inception. She wasn't rushing to help. She wasn't screaming in horror or even feigning concern. She was watching her arms, crossed her face, a mask of, what shock no, something colder, something appallingly satisfied. A small, almost imperceptible smirk touched her lips before she quickly schooled her features into an expression of carefully constructed dismay as she saw Marcus looking directly at her. Her eyes, however, remained hard, glittering with a chilling light. In that instant, Marcus Thorne knew with a certainty that settled like ice in his gut. This wasn't just a suspicion. This was a revelation. The federal director of playground safety, the man whose entire career was dedicated to ensuring that every child in America had a safe, joyful place to play, was about to investigate his most horrifying, most depraved case yet. An act of calculated, unimaginable cruelty perpetrated not by a random vandal, but by a woman whose obsession with aesthetics, exclusivity, and a warped sense of order had apparently curdled into a murderous rage against disabled children and the very concept of inclusive community. Inspector Marcus Thorne was a man who believed with an almost religious fervor in the transformative healing power of play. An architectural engineer with postgraduate specializations in pediatric biomechanics, universal design, and forensic engineering, he had dedicated his life to making playgrounds safer, more accessible, and more enriching for all children, irrespective of their physical, cognitive, or sensory differences. His appointment as the first federal director of the newly empowered Playground Safety and ADA Compliance Bureau, FGSB, an agency with broad oversight, investigative, and enforcement powers, was a testament to his unparalleled expertise and his unwavering, often uncompromising advocacy. He had personally reviewed, stress-tested, and approved the designs for Harmony Park's inclusive playground, a state-of-the-art facility funded by a combination of federal grants he'd helped secure and passionate, hard-won community fundraising. It was meant to be a national model, a beacon of inclusivity, a joyful refutation of prejudice. Now it was a federal crime scene. Harmony Park and its crown jewel, the Rainbow Ascent Slide Complex, served hundreds of children from across the county, many traveling significant distances. It was meticulously designed to accommodate children with a wide spectrum of disabilities, those using wheelchairs or walkers, those with sensory processing disorders requiring calming zones or stimulating tactile surfaces, those with cognitive challenges who benefited from clear pathways and intuitive play sequences. Sarah Chen, the park's manager, was a former pediatric physical therapist, a woman whose fierce dedication to these children was an inspiration. She had worked hand in glove with Marcus's office during every phase of design and construction, ensuring each element not only met, but exceeded the highest safety and accessibility standards. She'd even insisted on reinforced tamper-resistant fixings for key structural elements, a precaution Marcus had endorsed, though neither had imagined the scale of malice they would face. Karen Albright, president of the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association, whose sprawling multi-million-dollar properties loomed over Harmony Park with an air of feudal disdain, had been the project's most relentless, venomous, and insidious opponent from day one. She viewed the inclusive playground not as a community asset, a place of healing and joy, but as an intolerable intrusion, an aesthetic abomination that decimated property values, and in her coded language, attracted undesirable elements and their associated problems to the periphery of her pristine, aggressively gated domain. Her pronouncements often carried a disturbing undertone, a belief that resources spent on such children were wasted, that their presence was a drain on the community. She once had a cherished rose garden she'd lament to anyone who would listen, destroyed by vandals from that element, a thinly veiled reference to families visiting the park. The inciting incident that had first seared Karen Albright's aggressive opposition into Marcus Thorne's direct attention had occurred during the heated initial public comment period for the Harmony Park renovation plans. Albright, ostensibly representing the Oakhaven HOA, but clearly driven by a deeply personal animus, had delivered a lengthy vitriolic diatribe at a packed county council meeting. Her speech was a masterclass in veiled bigotry and baseless fear-mongering. She'd claimed the inclusive playground would be a magnet for vagrants and drug users, a breeding ground for communicable diseases, an outrageous and deeply offensive assertion clearly aimed at children with compromised immune systems and a catastrophic liability due to the inherent fragility and risks of adaptive equipment. She had, even with breathtaking arrogance and a chilling lack of empathy, suggested that children with such severe limitations and dependencies would be better served and safer in specialized institutions rather than being subjected to the false hope and inherent dangers of forced public integration. A few Oakhaven residents had applauded, their faces mirroring her disdain. Marcus Thorne, who had been present at that meeting to provide expert testimony on the robust safety engineering and profound societal benefits of inclusive playground design, had calmly, systematically, and devastatingly debunked every one of Albright's prejudiced, emotionally charged, and factually incorrect assertions. His presentation, backed by reams of peer-reviewed research engineering data and safety records from similar facilities nationwide, had swayed the council. They had overwhelmingly approved the Harmony Park plan, leaving Karen Albright visibly seething, her face tight with public humiliation and thwarted ambition. She had reportedly stormed out of the meeting, muttering chilling threats about taking this to a higher level, making them all pay for this desecration, and there are other ways to deal with infestations. The rising action of her subsequent campaign to undermine Sabotage and ultimately destroy Harmony Park had been relentless and multifaceted. First, she had orchestrated a barrage of frivolous, vexatious lawsuits, challenging everything from the park's zoning permits and environmental impact statements to the specific font used on its signage, all meticulously designed to delay construction, inflate costs, and bleed the nonprofit Park Foundation dry with exorbitant legal fees. Marcus's office, working closely with beleaguered county attorneys, had helped defeat each lawsuit, but the process had been a costly, time-consuming war of attrition. Then, once the playground was finally built and opened to joyous acclaim from the wider community and increasingly negative press for Oakhaven estates, Albright had escalated to more insidious direct harassment. She had instructed her Oakhaven estate's private security guards, the notorious Coastal Sentinels, run out of Seabreeze after the Eli Vance incident and now rebranded as Oakhaven Community Protectors, though their aggressive tactics remained unchanged, to aggressively patrol the park's perimeter. They ticketed cars with disabled placards parked on public streets anywhere near Oakhaven, claiming HOA parking enforcement zones that didn't legally exist. They set up bright, intimidating floodlights aimed directly at the park's sensory garden at night, disrupting its calming effect and distressing nocturnal wildlife. Sarah Chen reported finding graffiti, crude drawings, and hateful slogans like "Freaks Go Home," painted on park signs facing Oakhaven, always scrubbed away before Marcus could document it for federal complaint. Albright had even personally confronted Sarah Chen at the park on multiple occasions, her voice dripping with contempt as she loudly accused her of mismanaging the facility, endangering normal children by allowing too many of them on the equipment at once and creating an attractive nuisance. One time, she'd run her hand along a railing of the Rainbow Ascent, a strange, almost proprietary look in her eye, and muttered, "Such a shame, so vulnerable." The midpoint twist, the discovery that illuminated the horrifying potential for Albright to escalate from legal harassment and verbal abuse to actual catastrophic physical sabotage, came through a disturbing anonymous tip to the FGSB's safety hotline just a week before the collapse. The caller, a visibly distressed young man who identified himself as a junior engineer recently fired from JD Engineering Consultants. A small, somewhat shadowy local firm alleged a deeply unethical and potentially criminal conspiracy. He claimed his former boss, Arthur Jennings, an older engineer with a history of cutting corners and a revoked license in a neighboring state, had been contracted by Karen Albright ostensibly for an independent structural assessment of the Rainbow Ascent. The young engineer had seen Jennings meeting secretly with Albright multiple times and had overheard snippets of conversations about exploitable weaknesses, plausible deniability, and making it look like an accident. Jennings had then pressured him to falsify stress test data on a computer model of the Rainbow Ascent, specifically to downplay the integrity of the main support columns under certain load conditions. When he refused and threatened to report Jennings, he was fired. He also mentioned seeing Albright in Jennings' office, looking at what appeared to be diagrams for a sophisticated remote detonation device. "She wasn't just assessing it, sir," the whistleblower had told Marcus, his voice trembling. "She was planning how to bring it down." Marcus had immediately launched a covert preliminary inquiry into JD Engineering and Albright. He discovered that Arthur Jennings was indeed a disgraced engineer. He also found that JD Engineering had recently received several large unexplained payments routed through a shell corporation linked to Oakhaven Premier Properties, OPP, a high-end development consortium known for its aggressive tactics in acquiring land for luxury projects, and in which Albright was rumored to be a silent, influential partner. OPP had, in fact, made several unsolicited lowball offers to the county to buy the land Harmony Park occupied, citing its unsuitability for public use, and proposing a luxury townhouse development in its place. A red herring had briefly surfaced when a minor localized earth tremor, unusual for the region, had caused some superficial cracks in older buildings a few weeks prior. Albright had immediately seized upon this, writing inflammatory letters to the local newspaper and demanding Harmony Park be closed for a full seismic safety review, hysterically claiming its experimental adaptive equipment was unstable and a death trap waiting to happen. Bafim, Marcus's office, already alerted by the whistleblower, expedited a rigorous inspection. While the playground was found to be structurally sound and far exceeding all seismic codes, the inspection team did note one anomaly: a hairline fracture near the base of one of the Rainbow Ascent's main support pillars, which they attributed to the tremor and scheduled for minor reinforcement, unaware of its more sinister origin. Albright had successfully planted a seed of doubt, a whisper of fear in some corners of the community, creating a potential narrative for an accidental collapse. Now, as Marcus Thorne stood amidst the horrifying twisted wreckage of the Rainbow Ascent, the shrieks of injured, terrified children still echoing in his ears, the acrid smell of fear and something else, the distinct, sharp odor of a chemical accelerant in scorched metal near the obliterated support pillar, he knew. Karen Albright's campaign of hatred, fueled by greed and a chilling eugenicist ideology, had reached its terrible, inevitable, and murderous culmination. The fragment he'd seen glinting was part of a specialized, high-explosive cutting charge expertly placed. This wasn't just an attack on a playground. It was an act of domestic terrorism, an attack on the very idea of inclusion, of compassion, of a society that values all its children. And Inspector Marcus Thorne, the nation's foremost authority on playground safety, was about to bring the full, unyielding weight of his expertise and the righteous fury of federal law down on the woman and the network that had dared to turn a place of joy into a scene of unimaginable carnage. The immediate aftermath of the Rainbow Ascent's collapse was a maelstrom of frantic heroism and raw terror. Park staff, parents, and even some brave older children, uninjured but shaken, rushed to help their instinctive compassion, a stark, damning contrast to Karen Albright's cold, detached observation. Marcus Thorne, his mind already processing a dozen investigative pathways, even as he coordinated emergency protocols, swiftly identified the critical priorities: immediate medical aid, securing the unstable wreckage, preventing secondary collapse, and preserving every inch of the site as a complex federal crime scene. Sarah, Marcus called to Sarah Chen, who, despite a bleeding gash on her forehead from flying debris, was already on the phone with 911, her voice miraculously tight but controlled. Tell them multiple pediatric trauma, potential crush injuries, possible spinal, at least 6 ambulances, heavy rescue for extrication. Emphasize suspected explosive device request, bomb squad for immediate sweep, and JTTF notification. This is a deliberate act. He turned to the stunned but rallying park maintenance crew. Barricades wide perimeter. Nobody in or out except authorized personnel. Use the emergency fencing rolls. And for God's sake, keep everyone clear of what's left of that central tower. It's compromised. His eyes, trained to spot the subtlest structural anomalies, were already cataloging damning evidence. The main support pillar hadn't buckled or sheared from overload. It had been severed, the metal edges splayed outwards, characteristic of a precisely placed explosive charge. Several critical cross braces on the teetering remains of the structure were hanging loose, their connecting bolts not missing, but showing signs of being deliberately systematically loosened or partially cut prior to the blast. This was no impulsive act of vandalism. This was sophisticated, meticulously planned, malicious destruction. Paramedics and fire rescue units began to arrive, sirens wailing a desperate counterpoint to the cries of the injured. Marcus quickly briefed the incident commander, Fire Captain Henderson, a man whose grim face reflected the horror of the scene. "Captain, I'm Marcus Thorne, Federal Playground Safety. This collapse was initiated by an explosive device detonated at the base of that main support. Secondary sabotage to other supports is evident. We have multiple pediatric victims, some with severe crush and fall injuries. The remaining structure is highly unstable. Careful extrication is paramount." "Understood, Director Thorne," Henderson replied, his eyes scanning the wreckage. "My teams are trained for this. Bomb squad is en route. Do you have a primary suspect for the device?" Marcus's gaze flickered briefly towards Karen Albright, still standing impassively near the Oakhaven Estates fence line, now flanked by several equally aloof-looking associates, one of whom was filming the chaos on his phone with a smirk. "I have a very strong person of interest, Captain, and a developing conspiracy, but let's focus on these children." The rescue operation was harrowing, each minute an eternity. Firefighters using specialized cutting tools, hydraulic spreaders, and sheer courage carefully navigated the tangled, treacherous wreckage, extricating injured children one by one. Marcus, his engineering expertise proving invaluable, advised them on stabilizing precarious sections, on identifying hidden stress points in the damaged structure. He watched his gut twisting as small, frightened bodies were carried out on backboards, some crying inconsolably, some eerily silent, their bright play clothes torn, stained with dust, and in too many cases, blood. Lily, the spirited girl in the pink wheelchair, was extricated with a compound fracture to her leg and suspected internal injuries, but she was alive. She squeezed her mother's hand tightly as they carried her away, her eyes wide with terror, but also a flicker of childish defiance. "Bad slide," she whispered. Others were less fortunate. 2 children were in critical condition, their chances uncertain. The air thrummed with parental anguish and the desperate prayers of onlookers. Some parents were shouting for justice, pointing towards Oakhaven, their raw grief turning to fury. As the last injured child was rushed to the hospital, Marcus Thorne, now flanked by Special Agent Miles Corbin from the local FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, a man whose cynicism was currently eclipsed by a cold, focused anger, turned his full attention to the crime scene and to Karen Albright. "Agent Corbin," Marcus said, his voice low and hard, "I want Miss Albright and her known associates detained for questioning immediately. Secure her residence in Oakhaven Estates, the offices of JD Engineering Consultants, and any properties or offices associated with Oakhaven Premier Properties. I'm formally requesting full FBI forensic engineering and financial crime support. My office will lead on the structural sabotage analysis and ADA compliance violations, but this is unequivocally a federal domestic terrorism event targeting disabled children to advance a criminal conspiracy." Corbin, his jaw tight, nodded. "Already on it, Director Thorne. The whistleblower's information about Jennings and OPP gives us probable cause. We've had informal concerns about Albright's increasingly extremist rhetoric and OPP's predatory land acquisition tactics. This, however, is monstrous." Karen Albright, when approached by Agent Corbin and 2 stern-faced FBI agents, initially feigned indignant outrage. Detained, questioned. "This is an outrage. I am a pillar of this community. I was merely observing this tragic, unfortunate accident, offering my deepest sympathies to the affected families. How dare you imply I had anything to do with this horrific event? My lawyers will hear of this harassment." Her voice was shrill, but there was a tremor beneath the bluster. "Ms. Albright." Marcus interjected, his voice cold, precise, and devoid of emotion, stepping forward so he was directly in her line of sight. "We have the sworn testimony of a whistleblower from JD Engineering Consultants detailing your conspiracy with Arthur Jennings to sabotage this playground. We have evidence of your meetings, your requests for falsified data, and your interest in remote detonation devices. We have documented your relentless campaign of harassment and threats against this park and the children it serves." My preliminary engineering assessment of that collapsed slide indicates a deliberate, sophisticated explosive charge detonated at a pre-weakened support pillar, consistent with expert engineering knowledge and specialized demolition materials. Materials, I might add, that our informant saw being discussed in Mr. Jennings's office in your presence. He paused, letting his words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow against her crumbling facade. Furthermore, Ms. Albright, we are currently executing federal search warrants on your residence, Mr. Jennings's office, and the headquarters of Oakhaven Premier Properties. I am confident we will find the tools, materials, financial records, and communications that will fully expose your premeditation, your motive, which I know to be a toxic combination of your pathological hatred for this inclusive facility, your eugenicist disdain for disabled children, and your greedy conspiracy with OPP to seize this valuable parkland for lucrative redevelopment. You saw these children not as human beings, but as obstacles to profit and your perverted vision of an orderly community. The color drained completely from Karen Albright's face. Her carefully constructed facade of civic concern and aristocratic disdain shattered, revealing the raw, ugly, terrified core of her malice. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, now darted wildly glittering with a desperate cornered fury. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. Was it fear, regret, or just the realization of being caught? Then the mask of defiance slammed back into place, but it was brittle now. That playground, those children, they were an affront. She finally hissed her voice, a venomous whisper that carried clearly to the recording devices of the agents. They destroyed the tranquility, the exclusivity, the very character of Oakhaven. They were an eyesore, a blight, a drain. Their parents, coddling their imperfections, demanding special treatment, expecting the world to cater to their endless deficiencies. I was merely restoring balance, protecting our community from their encroachment. Sometimes difficult, drastic measures are necessary to preserve what is truly valuable, what is aesthetically pure. She was trembling now, not with fear, but with a righteous, chilling conviction. I did what had to be done. They wouldn't listen. They kept pushing their agenda. They forced my hand. This wasn't a plea for understanding. It was a venomous justification. Difficult measures, Ms. Albright. Marcus repeated, his voice dangerously quiet, each word laced with contempt. You call attempting to murder disabled children a difficult measure. You call turning a place of joy, therapy, and community into a scene of carnage, restoring balance. You are not protecting anything. You are a terrorist. And you, Mr. Jennings, and your partners at Oakhaven Premier Properties will spend the rest of your lives in federal prison contemplating the true meaning of value and humanity. Karen Albright was arrested and charged with multiple federal felonies, including domestic terrorism resulting in injury and death. One child, tragically, would later succumb to their injuries, conspiracy to commit a hate crime, use of an explosive device, malicious destruction of property, and numerous violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Arthur Jennings, apprehended trying to flee the state, quickly confessed his role in designing the sabotage method and providing the specialized charge, claiming Albright had blackmailed him with evidence of his past professional misconduct and then offered him a substantial share in the future OPP development. Executives at Oakhaven Premier Properties were also indicted as co-conspirators, their meticulously planned land grab scheme laid bare. The investigation revealed the full, horrifying extent of Albright's meticulous, cold-blooded planning. She had indeed used her long-dormant civil engineering degree, combined with Jennings's morally bankrupt expertise, to identify the precise structural weak points of the Rainbow Ascent. Over several weeks during late-night incursions into Harmony Park, bypassing security cameras, she knew Jennings had helped temporarily disable. She had supervised the partial cutting of secondary support struts and the loosening of critical bolts. Jennings had then, under her direction, planted a small but powerful, precisely shaped, explosive charge at the base of the main support pillar. It was designed to sever the pillar and trigger a cascading collapse timed for the dedication ceremony when the playground would be at its most crowded. The remote detonator, a sophisticated military-grade device, was found in Albright's safe, along with detailed plans for the Oakhaven Terrace luxury development slated for the parkland. The trial of Karen Albright. Arthur Jennings and the OPP executives was a landmark event, a harrowing national spectacle that exposed the dark underbelly of NIMBYism, corporate greed, and ableist hate. The testimony of the injured children, their grieving parents, and the heroic park staff was heartbreaking and galvanizing. Lily, recovering from multiple surgeries but determined, testified via video link from her hospital bed, her small voice unwavering as she described her love for the slide and her terror during the collapse. She later drew a picture of the rainbow ascent, surrounded by angels, which became a poignant symbol for the victims. Marcus Thorne's expert testimony on the engineering of the sabotage, the nature of the explosive device, and the systematic pattern of harassment was irrefutable and devastating. Albright's defense, a pathetic attempt to portray herself as a misunderstood community activist driven to desperation by an unresponsive bureaucracy and concern for public safety, was eviscerated by the prosecution, who painted her accurately as a cold, calculating terrorist, motivated by greed and a deep-seated eugenicist hatred. She was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge calling her actions an act of profound, calculated evil that strikes at the very soul of our nation's commitment to its most vulnerable citizens. Jennings received a 30-year sentence for his role. The OPP executives also received substantial prison terms, and Oakhaven Premier Properties was dismantled, its assets seized, and placed into a newly established federal Harmony Fund dedicated to building, maintaining, and securing inclusive playgrounds and recreational facilities for disabled children across the country. The community of Willow Creek, where Harmony Park was located, remained deeply fractured. While many residents rallied around the victims, organizing vigils and fundraisers, a vocal minority from Oakhaven estates and surrounding affluent areas launched their own legal challenges, attempting to prevent the park from ever being rebuilt, citing safety concerns and community trauma, thinly veiled attempts to achieve Albright's original goal. Protests and counter-protests became common outside the park's temporary fencing. In the wake of the Harmony Park tragedy, Inspector Marcus Thorne, working with a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers, some initially hesitant but swayed by intense public pressure and lobbying from disability rights groups, disability rights advocates, child safety experts, and the families of the victims, spearheaded the passage of the Harmony Park Inclusive Playgrounds, Safety, Accessibility, and Protection Act. Shing. The legislative battle was fierce. Powerful real estate lobbies and anti-regulation groups fought it tooth and nail, delaying its passage for months. But the moral weight of the tragedy, combined with Marcus's relentless advocacy and the poignant testimony of survivors like Lily, eventually proved overwhelming. The act mandated rigorous new national safety and security standards for the design, construction, inspection, and maintenance of all public and private playgrounds, with specific enhanced requirements for adaptive and inclusive equipment, including mandatory blast-resistant and tamper-proof designs for critical structural components in high-risk areas. Regular, unannounced, independent federal safety and security audits of all playgrounds receiving any form of federal funding or located on public land, conducted by an expanded and better-funded FGSB with increased enforcement powers. Greatly increased criminal penalties for any act of vandalism, sabotage, or malicious destruction, targeting playgrounds or recreational facilities with specific domestic terrorism and hate crime enhancements for acts targeting disabled individuals or inclusive spaces. Mandatory comprehensive ADA disability sensitivity and de-escalation training for all parks and recreation personnel, HOA board members, and private security firms operating in or near public recreational spaces with federal certification requirements. Significant new federal funding through the expanded Harmony Fund for the creation of new inclusive playgrounds, the upgrading and retrofitting of existing facilities to meet the highest standards of safety and accessibility, and grants for community-based inclusion and anti-ableism education programs. Harmony Park's Rainbow Ascent was eventually rebuilt stronger, safer, incorporating cutting-edge security features and, more beautiful than ever, a vibrant, defiant testament to the resilience of the children it served and the unwavering commitment of a community that, though scarred, refused to let hate win. The injured children, after months, sometimes years of painful recovery, rehabilitation, and therapy, eventually returned to play. Lily, walking now with crutches, but her spirit undimmed, was the first to go down the new rainbow ascent, her laughter initially hesitant, then joyous, echoing across the park, a sound of defiance, of healing, of hope. Inspector Marcus Thorne often visited the new Harmony Park, watching the children, his heart filled with a complex mixture of sorrow for what they had endured, profound anger at the evil that had targeted them, and an immense quiet pride in what they, their families, and their community had overcome. The scars of that terrible day would always remain a somber reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the most civilized and privileged facades. But the new Rainbow Ascent and the national movement for safer, more inclusive, and fiercely protected play that had risen from its ashes stood as a far more powerful symbol, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, the unbreakable courage of children, and the unyielding power of justice, compassion, and collective action to ultimately build a better, more accessible, and more humane world for all. The fight Marcus knew was eternal, but a significant battle had been won.